Hello, everyone. I'm Jim Garrison. I want to welcome you to this session of Humanity Rising. As we continue, as we have been doing since our inception in May of 2020, to apprise our Humanity Rising community of unfolding world events. There have been a lot of events over the last couple of days. There was the murder just day before yesterday of Charlie Kirk, a very conservative young man who was very important to the alt-right, but also someone who was consistently engaging with people on the progressive side to debate in the best spirit of democracy in this country. He was shot down. He was in his early 20s. He was shot by a single bullet in the neck. The assailant is still out there, and the police, the FBI, are seeking to apprehend him. We have a photo that apparently is a person of interest, as they say. At the same time, we've been monitoring the situation in Ukraine and in Poland, with Poland invoking Article 4 of the NATO treaty, which alerts the entire 32-nation NATO alliance for possible retaliation because of an incursion of Russian drones into Polish airspace. We're monitoring the situation in Gaza, where the assault on Gaza City is now underway, and 1 million Palestinians are being forced now at the point of guns and demolitions into southern Palestine, and now being herded into concentration camps on the Egyptian border. And we know, all of us, how that's going to end up. And so there's a lot happening. And in some ways, although not immediately apparent, but certainly historically the case, the unfolding momentum of disclosure around the most important piece of information, possibly in human history, continues to gain velocity. The reality that the US government and military and intelligence officials confirm over and over that we are not alone, that extraterrestrial beings are here on planet Earth, and there's been not only sustained contact and communication, but an extraordinary amount of evidence concerning retrieved craft, retrieved alien bodies, etc. So today, knowing that the world is as it is, we want to focus on a hearing that happened this past Tuesday here in Washington, D.C. I was privileged to be able to attend, and along with many other people, including Danny Sheehan and Steve Bassett, who was on Humanity Rising some weeks ago, to witness the U.S. Congress, a subcommittee on investigations of the House Oversight and Government Operations Committee, conducting a hearing with three gentlemen from the military, two from the Air Force, one from the Navy, and then a gentleman from the Office of Government Integrity, including whistleblower protection, and then a journalist, George Knapp, who has been keenly and scrupulously reporting on the UFO, as it was called then, and UAP, as it's called now, domain since the 1980s. It was very interesting to be part of that physically, live in the US Congress. But it was also important because it brought into the public domain additional information that we all need to understand and appreciate as we continue to monitor this extraordinary milestone in human history, the revelation that we are not alone. So I've taken the liberty of inviting Danny Sheehan back. Danny, as you all know, is an extraordinary human being, a constitutional litigator from the Pentagon Papers and the Daniel Ellsberg case back in the 1960s, all the way up to what he's been doing on UAP disclosure. It's an extraordinary career. And since he was a little boy, he's been passionate about the extraterrestrial issue. So he's still in town. So I've invited him to join us. So Danny, welcome to Humanity Rising. So hello, Danny. Welcome to Humanity Rising. It was good to see you at the hearing a couple of days ago, held under the auspices of a subcommittee of the House Oversight Committee. We haven't had a chance to debrief, but let's start our conversation with your own analysis of what was accomplished, what was left undone, and then we can talk about your views of the probability of meaningful legislation this year, and then we'll transition to broader issues.
Great, terrific. Well, what we had is on Tuesday morning, on the 9th, the task force of the House Oversight Committee convened to address the issue of the UFO phenomenon. It's sort of the first full-scale official time that they've brought on anybody like George Knapp to talk about it. It was a very important kind of development. You know, they had individuals like they had some of at the hearing, where individual, very credible military or intelligence people from inside the government who had seen craft and had reported this in the past, reiterated this to the committee. There were two Air Force personnel there and a Navy chief who had seen a craft, less than 200 yards away, and described it in some detail, and was emphatic about the fact that, as far as he knew, there was nothing in our arsenal that could do anything like what the craft was doing. But the reality was he wasn't really in a position to know exactly what it is that we have or we don't have. So that, it was important and helpful and there were over time, there were like a dozen different members of Congress came and attended the hearing, demonstrating that there were people, in addition to the members of the Special Task Force on Declassification, from other committees that wanted to come and sit in and ask questions. So it was very interesting. But I think that the featured event of the hearing was primarily the George Knapp testimony.
Yes.
It was clear that he began, in the 2 hours of the meeting, he was really quite calm and reticent to go beyond kind of a limited statement that he was making. But as it became clear that the members of the Congress that were there asking the questions were genuinely frustrated and genuinely devoted to trying to find out more about this, George Knapp became more kind of forward-leaning into telling them what, in fact, he had concluded based upon his, decades of investigation and interviews of various sources. So he became quite animated about the need for Congress to do something about this, that it was absolutely outrageous that Congress was continuing to go along knowing that this program was happening and not exercising adequate oversight. over it. And the Congress people tended to respond in kind. They were saying, yes, you're absolutely right. This is an outrage. Something needs to get done about this. And then, unfortunately, in the midst of all of this kind of elan over how interested the whole Congress was in doing anything about it, Congressman Eric Burleson from Missouri announced that the bill that he had proposed to insert into the National Defense Authorization Act, the UAP Disclosure Act that had been crafted by the United States Senate, and that the Rules Committee had in fact asserted that they were not going to allow his bill to be even considered by the House to be inserted into the National Defense Authorization Act because the whole UFO issue was not germane to the national defense. Now, this was in the face of the decades of the military and intelligence people who will acknowledge the reality of the UFO phenomenon, constantly talking about what a threat to the national security this was, how they were coming over nuclear weapons facilities, missile sites, and turning off the missiles, doing surveillance of other U.S. military personnel, primarily nuclear in nature. And it was basically a preposterous ruling on the part of the Rules Committee, asserting that the UFO issue had no relevance whatsoever to the national defense or the authorization of any intelligence work that needed to be done. So that in the midst of the kind of more or less euphoria that was going on around the hearing, there was this announcement,
Yes.
which I got a sense that there were only a handful of people in the room that realized the import of what he was saying. What he was saying is that this term in the Congress, there was not going to be anything introduced into the House of Representatives to be put into the National Defense Authorization Act, at least, having to do with UFOs. And what he didn't announce was the fact that something similar had happened over on the Senate side. And that is that there is a thing they call the management package of amendments that they want to put into the National Defense Authorization Act. And this is where the senators had put the UFO Disclosure Act to put it in with the management package, to just put it in the last couple of times. And in this case, it was not included. So what's happening now is that there's a major effort going on to try to get Senator Schumer, who was the co-sponsor with Schumer and Rounds, as well as with Senator Gillibrand, and very importantly, with Senator Rubio, when he was the senator, before he's become the Secretary of State now, that he was a sponsor of the bill, wanting to insert into the National Defense Authorization Act this setting up of this process of investigating the UFOs. That hasn't happened again this year. And so that what we're after now is to have the standalone bill to create the UAP controlled disclosure process, to have that be a standalone vote. And it doesn't get the advantage of having been embedded in the National Defense Authorization Act, which was a great procedural advantage to having it. And so that we
Now
now,
the senators will have to know what they're voting on.
that's right, and we'll have to vote for it on the record.
Yeah.
Are they, and that's, and importantly, yesterday, Senator Schumer did exactly that with regard to the Epstein matter. What he did is he made a motion to have the Epstein amendment, which was not included in the manager's package, be a standalone motion to have the demand for the release of the Epstein files made a special amendment to the NDAA, not part of the management package, so that everybody would have to vote on it. So he has proposed that now. and it is on the floor of the Senate today as one of the proposed late amendments, because what they refer to as the amendment tree is still open today to put any other additional amendment in, even though it doesn't have the same kind of priority or preference that would have attached to it if it had gone in with the management package. Okay, so that's where we are. And so that, I've been in touch with Congressman Burleson over on the House side, asking him to communicate directly with Senator Schumer over on the Senate side, where the amendment process is still open over there on the Senate side. And so that's still underway. The debate is getting underway about the particular content of the National Defense Authorization Act. But what we're trying to do is, before the door closes on getting actual amendments put into the bill, we're trying one more time to see if we can get the UFO Disclosure Act put into the National Defense Authorization Act. So it's a little technical, but the bottom line is that if we were not to succeed in getting it put in as a special amendment to the NDAA, we still have the option of trying to get it put onto the floor as an independent bill. Okay, so that this is not over. This is like in any kind of a major contest where you have an opponent, and we clearly do. The national security state people and the private aerospace corporations are quite adamant about not wanting this bill to come in. As we know, the private aerospace contractors want to be able to continue to reverse engineer the technology recovered so that they can get a private patent on it, and that they can therefore be in a position to lease or license to the government.
That's what George Knapp said. Remember that that was part of the strategy, is you take the information, put it into private contractors, and they're not bound by the Freedom of Information Act.
Right.
They're not bound by government regulations.
Right.
So they can go indefinitely unless compelled by Congress.
That's right.
To divulge what they know. So, and they're ordered to lie about it if they're ever asked.
That's right. And they feel that they're completely entitled to lie to Congress,
Yeah.
just as the military and intelligence officials have been lying to Congress. This is an extraordinary constitutional problem.
Exactly.
Of having an area as important as this designated as an area that in which they're authorized to lie to Congress. So that's where we are on this thing. That we were hoping that we were going to get the lift of having it included in the National Defense Authorization Act as part of the management package and just go in. But we have one last effort here to get it put in as a special amendment, because we know that Senator Schumer has done exactly that with regard to the Epstein.
Right. Well, let me ask you this, Danny. It would seem to me, anyway, as I was viewing it, that the meta theme was around whistleblower protection.
Yeah.
And in particular, this gentleman, Borland, who was clearly ill and stated on the record that he was on welfare, I mean, unemployment, and it was running out at the end of the month. And he chronicled how he had been lied to and then persecuted, and all the jobs that he thought he would be able to get as an intelligence officer were denied. And finally, he essentially is destitute. His kind of hands were shaking. And talk to us about that, particularly in light of the fact that Congressman Burchett was talking about his whistleblower bill, which actually you wrote last year and they watered down.
Yes.
What's the current status of whistleblower protection or not in the Congress or in the U.S. government? Because it's much broader than the UAP issue.
Yeah, there is not adequate support, short of a major citizen uprising, to demand that the Congress do what's necessary here. And that they're all distracted about the Epstein files. They're all distracted, over, understandably what's going on in Gaza, what's going on in the Ukraine, and that they have a comparatively narrow bandwidth of things that they're devoting their attention to. And so here we're saying, oh, by the way, did you know that there was an extraterrestrial civilization sending craft back and forth to our planet and actually flying over our missile sites and turning off the missiles and paralyzing our nuclear aircraft carrier battle groups out in the middle of the Pacific Ocean in turning off all their power and propulsion and communications equipment? Did you know that this was going on? And they go, well, it's not high enough on our agenda here because we have more pressing things.
Right. More immediate.
Yeah. And so the bottom line is that we've known that this is going to be a marathon. This isn't a 100-yard dash. We tried to take full advantage of the fact that there were some whistleblowers that were coming forward, even knowing the threats that they were going to be facing, such as David Grush and Lou Elizondo and a number of others. And to be clear, there's almost 40 people who are high-level security clearance people who have in fact come forward and testified in secret to the Senate Intelligence Committee, but they don't dare go public.
Mm-hmm.
And so when the senators ask them whether you're willing to have appear at a public hearing in the Senate, revealing what you've told us in private, they say, not until you get us better protection against being retaliated against and ruining our career, the revocation of our security clearances, the loss of our pension, even to the potential point of being imprisoned for violating their national security oaths, because the national security state views those oaths as binding them even from giving information to Congress, which they've stated on the record. Lou Elizondo and Grush and others have said, look, I'm not authorized by my national security clearance to tell you in Congress about this program, but I'm telling you that it exists. And that's all I can tell you.
Right, right.
So it's a question of the political courage, actually, of the members of the Senate and the House to be able to take on this deep state, this national security state that actually has risen into a position of power where they believe that they are the government. That they believe they're the permanent operatives of the government, and that these elected representatives are temporary employees, who come and go and get replaced, and therefore they can't be trusted with this information. To say nothing about entrusting the people as the citizens who have to vote on policies, so that the people are excluded from consideration, the elected representatives are excluded from consideration. And so the question is whether the Congress of the United States is going to have the courage to compel these people to come forward. And to date, they have not appeared to be willing to do this because I'll point out, they too are afraid of the national security state people, that they, as individual senators or Congress people, will be retaliated against by the national security state, by filtering millions of dollars of secret money into their next election against them, or worse.
Yeah, or worse.
Or worse. So this is the situation that we're facing here. And the UFO issue is at the tip of the spear here, because this is one of the most closely guarded secrets on the part of the national security state.
Exactly.
And they're willing to go to the greatest lengths imaginable to stop the Congress from having proved evidence about this.
Let me ask you this. I had the privilege, actually, of having lunch with Bob Salas yesterday. He was the young officer at Malmstrom, Air Force Base in Montana back in 1967, where the UFOs came over the base and shut down the Minutemen missile silos and so forth and
Yes.
so on. And he was feeling quite gratified by the hearings because, in his view, and this is what I wanted to check with you, he said this George Knapp's testimony about the nuclear weapons UFO interface, shall we say, was the first time that this had been stated in congressional testimony. Now, you've been at all the congressional testimonies. Is that the case? Because
That
if so,
is that is the case.
that was a major breakthrough then.
It's the first time that they've had but in this case, George Knapp, you say his evidence on this was from documents that he had secured from Russia, that he'd gone over to Russia during the Glasnost period, right after President Gorbachev had withdrawn from the Cold War, and there was an attempt on the part of the Russia and the United States to kind of form some kind of a positive relationship, especially with regard to space issues. And the military officials and intelligence officials in the Soviet Union, now Russia, were willing to share some of their information about this. And that's what began the discussion about how it is that it was now known. It was known by the Russian officials that United States missiles had been shut off because those of us who knew Bob Salas and others had in fact attempted to get the word out about them. And so that we've talked about them, we've interviewed them, we've had them come to a press conference, at the National Press Club, but that no one had yet come before Congress and actually testified under oath about the reality of this. And so for example, I was able back in 2001, when we had the National Press Club conference, news conference with the Disclosure Project with Dr. Stephen Greer, that we had testimony then about the shutdown of these missiles, et cetera, but nobody wanted to cover it. And I brought the commanding officer of the Maelstrom base that was in charge of the 3 or 4 different bases, the Omaha base and the other one. There were 3 or 4 of these separate Minuteman missile silos that were under the unified control of a commander who was the colonel, and it was Arnold Arleson, who was the colonel. He's the one that reported to NORAD that these missiles had been shut down. And we brought him to his congressperson. He was from Ohio, and we brought him to his congressperson, and he told the congressperson in face to face about the shutdown of these missiles. And the congressman actually said, well, there's not enough of us up here on the Hill who would really dare talk about this, publicly and in any official way, because we're all afraid. We're all afraid. The elected representatives are afraid of the national security state people, that they would send funds into our campaign against us next time we stood for re-election. And so it was known even back in 2001 that this threat was frightening the members of the Congress. So it isn't just the whistleblowers, it's the members, it's the senators and the elected Congress people who are afraid of the national security state. And that I was just reading just this morning detailed discussions by some of the Senate Intelligence Committee staff who were participating in trying to get this bill passed in the Senate, the UFO Disclosure Act, that they have dark black helicopters hovering like 20 feet over their homes in the middle of the night, that come swooping in and hang out and intimidate them. These are members of the Senate Intelligence Committee staff, and so this threat on the part of the national security state to retaliate, against not only whistleblowers but members of the Senate staff and senators and Congress people themselves. this is the state of affairs that we find ourselves in with regard
Well,
to the national security state in our country.
well, let's pause there and broaden this discussion because what happened yesterday with the murder of Charlie Kirk, the kind of alt-right young influencer, very heavily supported by right-wing money and political forces. As we all know, he was shot long distance, apparently with a rifle, 200 yards away. He was shot in the throat, died almost immediately. I raised this because I had dinner last night with a very senior individual in the Democratic Party and in terms of fundraising and political strategy and so forth and so on. And I asked him at the dinner, what is the thinking of the Democrats in the face of this growing authoritarianism, essentially a coup d'etat unfolding right before our eyes? And he said, there's very little thinking going on at all. And I said, how is that possible? And he said, it's because people are not only politically intimidated, they're physically afraid
Yeah,
of their family, for their families, for their staff, for their own well-being, because this intimidation is being orchestrated. I mean, if you think if it's being helicopters over the roofs of Senate staff, you can imagine what's going on with people like AOC or Bernie Sanders or various other progressive forces. And I was rather astonished, and I pressed him on it, and he said yes. He says people for the first time are just physically afraid. And that was the primary instrument that the Nazis used
yeah,
was psychological and physical intimidation.
that's right. And
So talk to us about that.
well, I mean, the fact of the matter, this has been going on for some time. That people don't realize that when Senator Frank Church, following the Watergate burglary, the House and Senate set up special committees to investigate the activities of the Central Intelligence Agency because there were the people that were in the Democratic National Headquarters. The three Cubans were all related to the Central Intelligence Agency. Uh, you know, Howard Hunt was a CIA person. Frank Sturgis was a CIA person. James McCord was a CIA person. So after the resignation of Richard Nixon over the Watergate burglary, everybody had succeeded in kind of keeping it narrowly focused. It was just Nixon himself that was the bad guy here. That he'd somehow directed these people to go into the headquarters, and people were publicly ignoring the fact that they were CIA people. But the senators knew better, and so that they convened the Senate Select Committee on Intelligence Abuse, chaired by Senator Frank Church from Idaho. And he led an erstwhile investigation into things that the CIA was doing. And one of the things that the CIA felt it was authorized to do was to assassinate foreign heads of state and to assassinate government officials, civilian government officials in other countries that were adverse to the interests of our country, at least as they perceived it. And all of that was made public, and nothing was done to stop them from doing that. Uh, but what happened is Frank Church, who had been elected 3 times to the United States Senate, with 65, 67% majority elections each time, his very next time, 2 years later, when he had to run for reelection in 1980, you know, he was blown out by millions of dollars arriving mysteriously into his campaign against him, revealing the fact that he supported the Equal Rights Amendment, which was not a really popular issue in
Idaho.
Idaho, right, right, and also that he favored some registration of automatic weapons, and so he was in favor of gun control. And so out he went. They did the same thing to Senator Dick Clark from Iowa, who had opposed covert operations of the CIA in Africa. They did the same thing to Senator Birch Bayh from Indiana. That they in fact we have successfully tracked the source of the money that was brought into Frank Church's campaign in 1980, and it came out of the Nugan Bank in Australia, which was set up by the CIA station chief in Saigon, Theodore Shackley, to house the money that he was skimming off the heroin trafficking in Southeast Asia. That's how serious this operation is. And we have tracked other monies coming out of the Nugan Bank, and we've tracked all of the different bank accounts. So we know that there is this full-scale operation going on, and we encountered it again when we were doing the Iran-Contra case. That we had ended up, through other people, providing information to Senator Durenberger, who was the Republican senator from Minnesota. And he stood up on the floor of the Senate and demanded an investigation of this off-the-shelf enterprise that was smuggling weapons illegally to the Contras and smuggling cocaine back into the United States. And the very next night, it was on the Saturday night following his Monday announcement that 3 Spanish-speaking men broke into their home and dragged his wife out of bed and put a gun in her mouth and threatened to kill her and their whole family if he didn't get up on the floor of the Senate and withdraw his demand for the investigation. And so the following Monday morning, he gets up and withdraws his request for the investigation, insisting that he had been told by Bud McFarlane that there was nothing to it, that there was no such enterprise. There was nothing like that going on. So he said, okay, so I believe Bud McFarlane, he said, never mentioned whatever happened to his wife, right? But he said, so he withdrew it. But the following 2 days later, Wednesday morning, on the front page of the Washington Times, the Mooney newspaper in DC, here's a photograph of his love nest where he is keeping his mistress in town. And they go on and on about this in the Washington Times. And then that Friday morning, the front page story of the Washington Times is that Senator Durenberger has admitted that he's a total alcoholic, and he's voluntarily enrolled in the Cedars, this hardcore right-wing fundamentalist rehab program, and his political career was over in the term of 1 week's time when he tried to stand up against these people. Okay, all of which was later proven to be true. I mean, we ended up continuing forward, even though there were these threats and intimidations, that I had, a death threat put out against me, by some guy in the 2506 Brigade down in Florida, so that, and they're all part of the kind of covert black operations of the CIA Operations Directorate, who have been authorized, or at least blinked at, to killing people all around the world, and assassinating people and smuggling heroin to secretly finance their operations, because they don't want to have to tell Congress about it to get funding for it. Okay, so I mean, this is the subtext of what's really going on here around the UFO thing. So this thing has come to the point where you have knowledge of an extraterrestrial civilization of non-human beings coming to our planet in spacecraft that are able to traverse billions of miles of space, in a matter of minutes, and that all the national security state people want to do is get their hands on such a craft so they can reverse engineer it to make weapons. Which they can then put in the hands of private aerospace corporations who can make billions of dollars by leasing them or licensing them to the government. This is, look at what I'm saying here is this opportunity that we have to mobilize the people of our country who so intensely want to know the answers to the UFO questions and what the information is we have about this extraterrestrial civilization. We have the opportunity here to move forward, to mobilize a vast majority of the people in our country to demand this information. And it has been demonstrated now that, in fact, there's a citizen uprising over the withholding of the information about the Epstein files. And because the people are so irate about that, because they've been promised by the administration to have this information made public, and it's now they're being lied to, and it's being kept secret. So now you see the fact is that a massive civil uprising on the part of our civilians is actually capable of coercing even the highest and most powerful people in the executive branch to have to comply. And so that we have literally Chuck Schumer, who is the sponsor of the primary UFO disclosure bill, yesterday putting onto the floor a motion to include into the National Defense Authorization Act the demand to release the Epstein files, because he knows that there is a citizen uprising demanding that we find out about that stuff. What we need to do in the UFO movement is we need to match that type of citizen interest, that kind of fervor to demand that this information. And so we've asked Chuck Schumer to say, look, you did this yesterday on behalf of the Epstein files. Why don't you do that today on behalf of the UFO Disclosure Act? It clearly is pertinent to the national defense of the United States.
Sure.
You know,
Let's talk about Epstein for a moment, because several weeks ago you were here on Humanity Rising, and you were talking about this interface between U.S. intelligence, the Nazis, and the organized crime that all came together during the Second World War and subsequently, and helped shape the National Security Act, was involved in the assassination of the Kennedys and various people in the 60s. The information that I have been able to glean about Jeffrey Epstein is that in some ways he's the poster child of this complex cabal of intelligence, military, industrial, organized crime, with the nexus being Mossad, CIA, MI6 at that level, implicated in not only the international drug trade, but the international sex trafficking and so forth and so on. And that Jeffrey Epstein was a product of that, but also an exemplification of that. And that is the scandal that's shaking the foundations underneath the current Trump administration, which, if brought to the light of day, could take down not only Trump, but it's an indictment against the political class of the United States, and I would say, and Israel, because Netanyahu was involved, other prime ministers were involved, heads of the Mossad were involved. So it's sort of the swamp within the swamp when you're
yes.
talking about Jeffrey Epstein, and it's bubbling up right at this moment. Given your deep history in all this, Danny, how do you understand that etiology, and what do you think the possibilities are now for genuine disclosure?
Well,
Meaning genuine disclosure about Epstein.
yes, yes, yes. But you remember that the very same panel in the House Oversight Committee that has responsibility for disclosing the UFO information
Is also with
are the
Epstein.
ones behind the Epstein thing. They're the ones pushing to get the Epstein stuff released. So they're being quite effective with regard to that one. Okay, and so that's why our request to have a similar initiative taken with regard to the UFO stuff is so obvious to do. But it's important to remember that Maxwell, who was his deputy, Giselle lady who was
Ghislaine
Ghislaine,
Maxwell.
yeah, Ghislaine. Ghislaine Maxwell, her father is a very clearly established Mossad operative. Okay. And that I'm working with a very, very prominent investigative reporter right now. We have obtained files of the Nugan Hand Bank, the one I mentioned earlier, which was the source of the money that was put into the campaigns against Frank Church and the other senators to oust them, that we've gotten access to the classified files of the Nugan Bank and have tracked them through. And there's ample evidence showing the interface between the American Central Intelligence Agency and the Mossad with regard to money laundering, major money laundering. And we know that by following those threads, it establishes that Maxwell himself, her father, was a very active Mossad operative. And so to have Ghislaine Maxwell, his daughter, being the right-hand person to Jeffrey Epstein, basically recruiting the young girls, training them, and deeply involved in all of the operations of the network. And his network wasn't just the sex trafficking of young 16, 17-year-old girls for these prominent politicians and business people, but they were involved in the money laundering of billions of dollars of money going through the operations that Epstein was overseeing. Okay, and the real estate operations, where you have the interface directly between Jeffrey Epstein and Donald Trump, where they got into a competition over who was going to be able to purchase a particular major mansion at one time. But the bottom line is that it's clear that Donald Trump was quite intimately involved with Epstein himself and with Ghislaine. And that Ghislaine, whose father is a major, operative of the Mossad, and I'm not saying, I'm not dumping on the Mossad. They do what they do. They're kind of on the edge from their own perspective of threats constantly against them and people trying to get rid of the state of Israel. They have an extremely aggressive and ambitious covert intelligence program through Mossad, and in fact, were trained at the Anti-Communist Special Warfare Training Academy that was set up after World War II by the Nazis. The surviving Nazis, Reinhard Gehlen, who was the head of the Third Reich's anti-Soviet and anti-Eastern Bloc intelligence, was made by the United States, was made the head of West German intelligence at the end of World War II.
Yeah.
And he established this academy, this anti-communist special warfare training academy, which was actually established at one of the castles that was used to train SS elite by the German Nazis. Okay, and they used the exact same castle to train these people, and they trained 1,200 men from 1948 to 1965 in all of the Western intelligence communities, including the Mossad, because the Mossad had determined that never again were they going to be excluded as part of the Western Caucasian, capitalist people. They weren't going to continue to allow themselves to be characterized as nomadic aboriginals that the Nazis viewed as racially impure and inferior. Okay, so the intensity with which the Mossad organized itself at the end of World War II to defend the state of Israel leaked over into them starting to do the same kind of things that the CIA was caught doing. Political assassinations, blackmail, and one of the favorites was the honeypot, setting up sexual situations so that high-level intelligence possessors, could be blackmailed with their families by putting them together with prostitutes or ideally with young girls, so that everybody could be offended by that. Okay, and so that the actual group that was working very closely with Ghislaine and with her father were in fact a Mossad group that was notoriously known for using the honeypot scheme of sexually compromising their targets. And so the fact that the Epstein operation rose up to have that being a major aspect of what it is that he was engaged in doing shouldn't surprise anybody. But it has Mossad fingerprints all over it, right? And the fact is that the Soviet KGB or GRD, as they later became after that, they recognized it right away too. They said, look at what Epstein is doing. This is a great espionage target to go after this information. And so that you had, and CIA was obviously also aware of what was going on there. So this became a target for all of the major black programs, if you will, of these covert operations people, including the Soviet Union or Russia. So that this thing is an explosive scandal that can blow up potentially the entire political class here in the United States, as well as in Israel. So that this is a very dangerous thing. And the problem is that the reason that the Democratic Party is so intense upon trying to facilitate the demand for this information going public is because they think that it's going to injure Trump and reduce the election possibilities for the Republicans in 2026. And it's not because they're deeply offended at the fact that it was going on, because they knew it was
Certainly
going
weren't
on.
when Bill Clinton was president.
No, no. It
Yeah,
isn't,
yeah.
it isn't as though they do anything for the right reason. It's just this practical, short-term political gain that they're engaged in here.
Mhm.
And right up until yesterday, with Schumer, coming forward and saying, "Can I get some water, please?" We've got to have the Epstein information publicly revealed. But I think that that it is going to carve the way to be followed by the UFO issue. Uh,
Well, let me ask you this, Danny. I'd like to circle back to the
okay.
Charlie Kirk murder yesterday. Many of the commentators are saying that this is a turning point, that the retribution that Donald Trump will now exact in terms of additional draconian measures uh, will be unusually severe, and that this is, in a perverse way, the opportunity he's been waiting for. What's your measure of that? What, how do you view what happened to Charlie Kirk in relationship to the broader rise of authoritarianism in the United States? And I would just frame it in that we've seen a number of assassinations of political figures over the last 6 months with uh, the state senators in, I think it was Wisconsin,
Mhm.
and very little statement from Donald Trump on that occasion, mostly blame. And now one of the people in his camp has been killed, and he reacted, as he said, with grief and anger. And one can only imagine what an angry Donald Trump will be thinking of doing at this moment. How do you assess it, and what would you speculate as to what's now going to unfold?
Well, that you would assume that it would be important to determine who it was that did it. Okay, number one. But the problem is that even if you found out that it was some total individual who was just completely mentally ill and just was attracted to Charles because he was a prominent person and killed him because he was a prominent person, that wouldn't stop the elements on both sides of this dialectic that's going on now in the country from trying to turn to their advantage this
Hmm.
horrible event that took place. And for example, you've already seen the people on the left are saying isn't it ironic that just before he was shot, he was talking in favor of guns? And that not allowing anyone to restrict the access to guns and high-powered rifles and stuff like that. And they're trying to climb on that pony right now. Of course, on the other side, no matter who it was that was involved in actually doing the shooting, the hard right is going to start saying this was the left killed him because they hated his ideas.
Yes.
There's no long pattern in our American political history of this happening from progressive people. Progressive people didn't kill John Kennedy. Progressive people didn't kill Bob Kennedy. Progressive people didn't kill Martin Luther King. Progressive people for the most part, aren't doing this, right? This is coming from a culture that extols violence and extols weapons and guns and the killing of people, and that's what Trump is playing on, and that's the group that he's trying to mobilize to the point where he openly threatens people, with physical violence. That when he at his rallies, somebody stands up and holds up a sign that he doesn't like, and he says, "Yeah, if I feel like punching that guy right in the face." And then, not to anyone's surprise, people punch the guy in the face, and he's calling for these kinds of acts of violence, against people who differ with him on policy, and specifically people who are more progressive or more liberal than he is. And so he's trying to mobilize this really 18%. And it's important always when I talk about this to realize the true believers that are the true Trumpites are only about 18% of the population. The problem is that if only half of the people vote, then that becomes like 36% of the voting population because they're highly mobilized to vote, right? And so you get 36% of the people already in that camp, or what registers as that. And then all you have to do is have another 15% or so of the people who are going to vote for whoever the Republican Party nominates, because they will not in 100 years vote for a Democrat, just like there are Democrats who under no circumstances would vote for a Republican because of that dialectic that's going on. And so all you have to do is supplement this 18% actually of the population with another 5 or 6% of the population. And you get them, it gives the appearance of being a split right down the middle in the country, so that you get a Congress, with only 3 seats, basically out of 435, or 3 seats out of 100, separating the two of them. And there's this false image that somehow our country is split right down the middle, over this thing. Whereas it's absolutely clear that an overwhelming, significant majority of people, if they knew their own best interests, would not be supporting the policies,
Exactly.
programs of Donald Trump.
Yeah.
And so the bottom line is, I have no doubt whatsoever that the hard right is going to be going completely out of its way to blame the progressives for basically killing this fellow. They're going to do that, and the problem is that they're going to do this no matter who it is that's found to have actually done it.
Yeah.
Okay. And the problem is they're likely to get away with it because that they're lying in wait for these kind of opportunities, because Donald Trump knows exactly what the scenario is to play out here, because he had a copy of Mein Kampf on his bedstand, before he ever even ran for any office. That he's memorized speeches of Mussolini. We know all of this to be true. So he's focused on the playbook of the fascist takeover in Germany in the 1930s. That's exactly what he's following. So this is a very dangerous moment, in that everybody, all the people that are liberals and progressives and people like, for example, I was just talking to a guy last night who was going off in response to this shooting, going, "Oh, see, it's this violence that's being stirred up by the Biden people, and it really started under Obama." Because when Obama came in, all the black people felt that they could do whatever they wanted to do, and they were going around burning down police stations in Minnesota, in Minneapolis, and all this violence is afflicting us. And there is right into the midst of talking about how violence is pervading our entire country. And Trump is using it to justify sending in armed military officials, or military people into all the democratically controlled cities. And you can just see it right on the face of what what's happening here.
Exactly.
And so, and the challenge is that what we have to do in the moderate and liberal and progressive community, we've got to make sure that we don't do the same, that we don't get caught in what happened in the 1930s in Germany to start adopting their tactics. Of jumping on this particular it's terrible incident that happened to start flogging the fact that he was talking about guns before he got shot, and turn it into a kind of a political football all the time. So that's what we've got to be able to do. But there's no doubt whatsoever what it is that is going to be being done by Trump about this thing, and trying to not deal with the weapons or anything, or even deal with whoever the particular individual was, but they're going to start using this to almost certainly try to expand what they call the ADEX list, which is the administrative index. There's actually an index that is kept on the part of the Attorney General of a list of American citizens who they believe may not be adequately loyal to the government of the United States in the event that the president has to declare a state of national emergency. We've encountered this. We know that this list exists. We know that William French Smith refused to make it available back during the Reagan-Bush administration, at the demand of Ed Meese and others, that they were trying to target the people who were on that list as being enemies of the state. Okay, and you can bet that that's going on. That inside the Justice Department, the Attorney General, has that list, and you can bet they're starting to try to put more and more people on it.
Sure.
It's like the Nixon enemy list writ large. Okay, so this thing is going on right now, and this tragic event that happened yesterday is no doubt going to be leapt upon by Trump and his acolytes, and people like Steve Bannon and Steve Miller and all the rest of this crowd are going to go flogging this thing for as far as they can and argue on behalf of more guns, people having more guns, and sending more military official or military police and things into the cities, all Democratic cities, and try to increase the putting of Hispanic Americans basically into boxcars, basically, and transporting them around the country and putting them into these big detention centers. I mean, if people don't recognize the parallels of what's going on here, we have to go out of the way to help them see the parallels of what's happening here.
Well, thank you, Danny. This is a sobering analysis, but I think it's important for us to be, as Gorbachev said, ruthlessly realistic about our situation. And I think your analysis of the Charlie Kirk murder and the Epstein matter and the UAP situation have been very, very important updates for us today. So I really want to thank you for spending the time. I know you're very busy, but that'll be enough for today. So that'll bring us to a close, everyone. You can join the after chat. You'll see the link in the chat box that Stan has put in. You received the link in your Zoom reminders for today. We'll see you next Friday, same time, same station, here on Humanity Rising. Thanks, everyone. Bye for now.
Till next time, Jim. Till next time.
Goodbye.
Okay.